think.
This meeting is being recorded.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that is us live and our recording has been enabled. So let us begin. So first off, I just want to acknowledge apologies that we're starting a little bit late. We had a couple of technical issues. Even though I live in the middle of the city, apparently 2:30 on a random Monday is when the internet goes down. But regardless, hello and welcome to Queering Activism. I will be your moderator for this event. My name is Sharon. My pronouns are they, them. I've been involved with Galway Pride since 2016. And I'm still volunteering. I'm no longer on the committee, but I'm here in a volunteering capacity. And we have a wonderful panel of speakers planned for this afternoon, where we're going to be talking about queering activism and how queerness intersects with so many other identities and so many other struggles and fights. And we have a really great panel here that we're going to be introducing you all to, and then having some quick discussion topics on. So let me start with my introductions. I will go alphabetically. I think it's the fairest way. So Alice, over to you if you want to do a quick introduction.
Yeah, my name is Alice. My pronouns are she, her. I am in the Connell Youth Movement. We're a Marxist youth organisation, and also CATU, which is a tenants union, so effectively like a trade union for kind of communities and tenants.
Nope, sorry. One of our volunteers is in the background here with me. But yes, no, thank you so much for that, Alice. And as a fellow CATU member, I definitely appreciate CATU's work here in Galway. So next we'll go over to Clara. Over to you.
Hi, my name is Clara Kennedy. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm a very recent member of the Galway pro-choice movement. I've only actually started volunteering this summer, but I'm really happy to be able to talk on behalf of my movement.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, great to have you. And like, it's so great to see like new volunteers still coming into these movements. And like I said to you before we started recording, we've all been in the position where it's our first time speaking at something. So thank you so much for your time. Yeah. Dara, then over to you. Sorry, cut you off.
Yeah, that's fine. So my name is Dara, my pronouns are they, them, and I am the education officer here at TENI, which is the Transgender Equality Network Ireland. So we work with trans people and their families all around the country to try and make things better for trans people. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Very important work as well, especially in current times. And last but most certainly not least, Isolde, over to you.
Thanks, Shar. So hello, everyone. My name is Isolde. My pronouns are she and her. The hats that I've brought with me today are the hats of Full Spectrum Ireland, which is the first national grassroots organisation for disabled LGBTI plus people. But I'm also kind of here with my Disability Power Ireland hat on. We just had our first celebrations in Ireland of Disability Pride Month over July. Other hats in my hat stand include DADA, which is Disabled Artists and Disabled Academics. I've been involved in the Leitrim abortion rights campaign. Probably some other stuff that I'm not even thinking of at the moment, but yeah. Oh, Leitrim Pride, of course, which is happening next week. I'm like, how could I forget? So yeah, a few different hats on, but primarily today I'm Full Spectrum and Disability Power. So.
Oh, fabulous. I definitely know that of being like, when you care about a lot of things, you end up with a lot of hats very quickly. But no, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. So I'm going to get the ball rolling with our first discussion question. So if your group isn't specifically an LGBT plus group, how does queerness intersect with the work that your organization does? Perhaps maybe in unexpected ways, just if you're like TENI, for example, because it's like I would expect that, you know, queerness would intersect with your work quite well.
Yeah, I mean, queerness is certainly obviously at the heart of everything that we do at TENI. obviously working mostly with trans people across all kinds of different trans identities, and we do a good bit of work as well with the intersex community as well. So yeah, I mean, it's very central, it's very core to what we do. I suppose in that way it maybe might be more interesting for other people to answer this question, because
Yeah,
it's just who we are. Yeah.
no, that's perfect. Anyone want to come in?
Yeah, so kind of with CATU, like tenancy issues and homelessness are kind of like they're issues that disproportionately affect queer people. Like we're kind of disproportionately vulnerable to landlord abuse, and disproportionately queer people suffer from homelessness, all that sort of thing. So I think like it's just any kind of marginalized identity is going to end up kind of disproportionately suffering when tenants don't have any power.
No, 100%. I know that all too well. Between like fixed incomes or other kind of struggles with housing. So I feel that hard. Clara, do you want to come in?
Yeah, of course. Like, I guess like there is the whole stereotype that a lot of people think that pro-choice movements only affect women who are attracted to men, but it affects everyone really. Like every person is affected by this, whether or not you can carry a child to term. If you can't, you're probably either related to someone or have connections to someone who can, and it's basic empathy that like can help protect people's like rights. And also just like having control over your body. It's one of a few areas where like having control over what goes in your body, like sorry like having control of what's happening to your body is a really important thing to everyone. And I think having just having the ability, just it's no one else, there's no other real issues that sorry, I can't think of anything at the moment.
No, you're totally fine. And yeah, like bodily autonomy, it intersects with every kind of issue, because if you don't have access to rights over what happens to your body or healthcare or reproductive care, like it all intersects. So I totally get what you mean. Yeah, Isolde, over to you.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, Full Spectrum Ireland really grew out of recognizing that there was this huge intersection between queerness and sort of, non-heteronormative identities and being disabled. And some of that kind of, certainly for me, part of the recognition of that intersection was in kind of talking to and working with trans people, and, because I'm cis female. So, just kind of suddenly recognizing that there were these similar kind of experiences of exclusion and of, mainstream assumptions made about who you are and, how your body works, that really just, didn't have its own voice. So, Full Spectrum has really grown out of a recognition that that's this huge intersection where, disabled LGBT people, we have a lot of very particular, specific experiences that don't always get communicated. And so the other kind of interesting element then from the Disability Power Ireland perspective is that, that's a very much an activist group that has sort of come out of some of the movements in disability activism that got really kind of galvanized over lockdown, because the world going online suddenly made virtual spaces that much more accessible, and disabled people were suddenly connecting across the country in ways that we just have not been able to do in physical space for all kinds of reasons. So being able to actually organize from our own homes, was just this huge opportunity. So Disability Power Ireland has kind of arisen out of that, but then also out of this idea that Disability Pride Month needs to be recognized and celebrated. And that has grown out of, witnessing the movement of LGBT prides over the last 50 years. And the whole kind of idea that pride is celebration, but it's also protest, and that it's about kind of visibility and, you know, celebrating the strengths of a particular minoritized community. So, you know, Disability Power Ireland really grew out of, you know, recognizing what the LGBT pride movement has done. But also, it's called Disability Power Ireland because it's taking a lot of its political structures and ideologies out of things like the Black Power movement. You know, so it's got identity as well, you know, that kind of identity politics in the best sense feeds into the way that it runs and operates.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And like, even just kind of realizing with the four of you speaking, it's like, as a non-binary, pro-choice, disabled tenant, I'm like, oh, I care about all of these things very much. So it's and I definitely like have a lot of firsthand experiences of what kind of barriers can be there. But for like the people who are watching along, do you want to talk about the specific kinds of barriers to access, acceptance, and even safety within the wider LGBT plus community that our community can unknowingly perpetuate by leaving some of their community members behind?
I think there's like kind of, I feel like there's a bit of a tendency, especially among more like middle class LGBT people, to kind of demonize like working class and rural areas as the source of homophobia, which kind of like, it doesn't reckon with like homophobia, like the source of homophobia as the patriarchy, and which reinforces capitalism and is reinforced by capitalism. And it also doesn't kind of reckon with just that most queer people are going to be working class because most people are working class. And just this kind of attitude that like, oh, I'm suffering just because these like awful working class people hate me. And it's like that, it's a very kind of reductive attitude, and it's also an attitude that just excludes a lot of queer people. And I kind of encountered that a lot, I think, especially middle class queers.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, I think sometimes there can be like, in the more kind of white, settled Irish cisgender population, will be like, oh, but we know suffering too. Like, we just want to have a party, and like, why are you all so angry? And you're like, but pride is, there's a lot of work to be done still, you know?
Just because it's like easier for people with more resources doesn't mean that like the issues are dealt with.
It's like, we have marriage equality now, what are you still complaining about?
Why are you protesting?
No, that's so true. Dara, I might go to you, because I know that unfortunately there can be transphobia and ambiphobia and lots of other nasty stuff coming from LGBT people. So I'm sure you have lots of feelings on this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think on that, absolutely. I also want to echo kind of, you know, what Alice and Isolde have been saying around like, I think particularly around the sort of class piece, I think is really important as well, in terms of like, when we talk about the LGBT community as if it is this sort of coherent thing that can be understood, I think we need to really be conscious of pulling apart what we mean by that, and pulling apart the things that maybe we are allowing within our community out of a sense of wanting to be in community with each other or belonging with each other, that sometimes can actually be reinforcing, you know, all of those really unhelpful power dynamics. Well, I mean, unhelpful is a very gentle word to be using here. You know,
that's okay.
Oppressive, whatever. Also unhelpful, I guess, is the word choice. You know, around like kind of class-based oppression, around like, you know, even to kind of call back around the kind of rural urban thing as well. I think a lot of those ways of thinking about it kind of preclude us from actually working better with each other, and finding kind of areas in which we can work, which I think again also was highlighted in you know, when the pandemic started and when it really hit and everything moved online. I think that opened up so much space, and it was such a space of possibility in terms of like organizing with people that you're not physically near to. It was really, really exciting. So I think there's all that accessibility piece, all that kind of solidarity piece that needs to be thought about within the community and within like the LGBT kind of Q umbrella of people, and we need to start thinking about that at home. But then obviously, as you said, in terms of like even in terms of how we think about each other in relation to our own queerness, there obviously there has been, and I guess probably for some time will continue to be, elements of like transphobia within the community, biphobia within the community, all that sort of stuff. And I think that exists because we live in an unequal power setup, in which some members of the community do have more privilege than others and have more kind of access to resources and have more kind of ability to maybe move around more easily in the world, and that I think creates a mindset in which you maybe think differently about people who do not have that kind of thing. So, and even as we talk about the marriage equality thing, like the marriage equality was the be all and end all for many people. And obviously it can be quite a hollow type of equality when you have queer people who are homeless, or queer people who are, being killed or experiencing physical violence or sexual violence or whatever it might be, or not having access to the healthcare that they need or whatever it might be. And I think highlighting those disparities between what it is that people are experiencing and therefore what it is that they're fighting for, really needs to happen before we're able to kind of work together more closely. So
yeah, no, 100%.
Lots to do.
Yes.
within our own house,
Yeah, like we're like our community is often treated like a monolith, even though we very much are not. Like we're like leftist political parties. It's like we're all each like working on our own little thing, and we're like, oh, we don't like those ones over there.
Yeah.
But I mean, sure, even as you said, in terms of like, as you were like, oh, well, like as a non-binary tenant, whatever it was, like none of us live single issue lives, and it's such a cute way to say that, but it's so true.
And like I hate how like the far right have demonized like the word identity politics, because it's like, of course your identity is going to influence your politics. Like,
well, this is the term was sort of introduced by some of the first intersectional feminists who were Black lesbians. And it was a way of saying, okay, so we're Black lesbians, but we recognize that we are under the same patriarchal oppression as these other groups, including, sort of working class identities and, whether it's racial, sexual, gender, whatever. And it was about using that as a strength. It was about saying that, we sort of recognize that across these different identities, we are fighting the same fight. And the term identity politics now has been, weaponized against us, and quite successfully. I'm really concerned about the movements of the L and the G taking precedence over the rest of the LGBTI plus spectrum, and it's getting legitimacy in a way that is, internationally, that is really very, really frightening. And, if we allow that to happen here with an LGBTI, then that's on us, that is on the whole LGBTI community, because we do share struggling against the same systems, and just to sort of slightly switch back, I mean, the reason that I plucked marriage equality out of the air is because, disabled people don't have marriage equality. We lose all of our supports. We don't get treated as an individual if we are in a long-term relationship and choose to either cohabit or marry somebody. Then, basically our lives are at an end, and our partner is treated as our sole caregiver, and we're expected to just stay at home and do nothing. So, again, it's like, okay, how do you create equality, or how do you create equity? Because it might be just a question of a legal marriage for one person, but for someone else, that's right at the top of the pyramid. We've got a lot more to get through. And again, very much like queer people, disabled people are disproportionately represented in the homeless population. You're twice as likely to be disabled if you're homeless than if you're not. That's saying an awful lot.
And like, disability is the only minority that you can become overnight. If you have an accident happen, if you get an illness, if you have a post-viral syndrome, which is what happened to me, like it's kind of like, I think there's such a people taking their health for granted, and so much like, and I always say, like, I feel like when I say that, it always sounds like a threat, like I'm just about to go beat. It's like, oh, be an ableist, I'll make you disabled. No, but not meaning it like that, more as in the, like, you should be better to us because you don't know what your tomorrow looks like. And if you are lucky enough to live a long and healthful life, well, growing old will disable you. So you will be part of us someday, whether you like it or not.
Also, I think just on that point, I think it's useful to point out, even if lesbian people or gay people don't actually care about bisexual or trans people, it's still in your interests to fight for bisexual people and trans people, because the root of the discrimination against you is the patriarchy. It is gender roles. And so, like, you can't fight against gender roles, you can't fight against homophobia without also kind of supporting trans people, supporting people who break those gender roles.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important point as well, is that you can't be a feminist and also support strict gender roles, you know? It's a bit of a
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And it's kind of like this conditional allyship can be such a barrier as well. Like, I was at an event, I was at an LGBT event recently, and I found out afterwards that an attendee sent in a complaint because a trans person got misgendered and corrected the person. And the person who was corrected was like, I was feel very unwelcome, and just sent this really weird defensive email. And you're like, it's an LGBT space. Like, that means you got to be cool with all the letters. And it was just like, oh, it just really annoyed me.
But this is one of the things about privilege, you know, is that it's multifaceted and it's sort of multi-storage. So, or storied, you know, so you might be more privileged than one person, less privileged than another, more privileged than them in some respects, less privileged in other respects. It's not just linear, you know. And so people who believe that they're not privileged, if they're called out for their privilege, often get incredibly defensive. And that's something that I think a lot of disabled people have found within LGBTI spaces, you know, is that if we even point out, look, I can't come to your event because stairs, which is the most basic kind of signal that this is not including disabled people, you know, the kind of responses you get can be really horrendous. They can be really vicious, you know. I mean, the most often you're ignored or dismissed, and that's just, you know, that's just the norm, is to be ignored, dismissed, and discounted, you know. But sometimes it does go over into actual aggression, because people are going, you know, oh, how dare you say that we have some kind of privilege, we're a completely oppressed minority. It's like, yeah, but I'm part of that minority too, and you're excluding me from it. So you know, but so I think it's one of the things about the kind of anti-racism rhetoric over the last few years is that it's given us new tools to talk about privilege, and to understand that, you know, you don't have to be an oppressor in order to benefit from the privilege that comes with being part of your group. You know, that you don't have to be racist to benefit from white privilege. You don't have to be abled to benefit from, you know, disableism, because disabled people can be ableist against each other. You know, all of that. We've got a new language for it, which I think is really helpful.
Yeah, no, 100%. And just Clara, just if I want to come to you quickly about this with
just coming in on that, like, I do recognize that I come from a place of privilege, especially in pro-choice areas, because when people think of pro-choice issues, they are usually thinking of someone like me, like a young woman. Like, that's who, like, honestly, like, yes, if I walk into a clinic, no one's going to raise an eyebrow. But if someone with a different gender identity than me walks in, it's almost like they're going to be attacked from trying to come and get access to the health care they need, just because they don't look like what people think. And I imagine there's also ableist in that space, because as well, I can't talk from experience, but if someone else could, that I would honestly that as well.
Yeah, like I was going to say, I have as someone who is on medication that would be very dangerous both to myself and whatever life was trying to grow inside me. If I became pregnant, I would have to choose to either come off my medication, which would, like, I'm barely functional on medication, and even like you're seeing stories in the US where like people with uteruses are having difficulty accessing medication that they're prescribed for their health because it could be used as an abortion like avenue, like I can't remember the name of it, the methotrexate.
Methotrexate.
Methotrexate. It's a medication that's usually if you've got like kind of like issues with your immune system where it might be causing different illnesses or damage to your body and you have to be on some form of suppressant for that. It is also often prescribed as alongside as an abortion pill that you can take. So people in the US are having trouble getting their prescriptions filled right now. And like, not like, there's just a lot of things on that. So thank you for bringing that one up as well, because it's a health aspect as well.
I do think it's quite unfair that a lot of people see the potential of life as more important than the people who are actually alive right now. And like, it's not an easy choice for someone to choose between a medication that's improving their quality of life and helping them, and carrying, like, if you had to give blood to help someone, no one's going to force you to do that. No one's going to say, okay, you have to get off your medication that's helping you now because you need to give this person you don't know blood. Or even if it is someone you do know, there's no requirement to give up your own health to help this person. But something pregnant people have to face a lot of the time.
Oh no, and it is like, we could probably be going back and forth all day being about how these things intersect. So I will put a pin on it for now. But it is like, it's all so interconnected, and it's why so many of us, when we are in these spaces that aren't necessarily LGBT spaces, will go, hey, this affects us too, and it affects us slightly differently. Can you please stop erasing that? But I think, can we maybe steer the conversation towards perhaps like suggestions on how our more privileged community members could be better allies to the LGBT people in their organizations? If anyone has some nice tips or anything that they'd like to give on that.
I think just listen to us and, try and check that defensive response. If someone is calling you out for excluding a particular group, or for making it more difficult for a particular group of people to access your services, your spaces, listen and reflect and, think, okay, so we made a mistake, well, let's do it better, and I think particularly at the moment, because here we are on a Zoom event, which became the big thing over lockdowns when the whole population was very conscious of the risks of COVID. A lot of us have been in lockdown for way longer than that anyway, both prior to the pandemic and now post-pandemic, because of things like immune compromise, or just whatever our circumstances are, won't allow us to be safe in public spaces. And with this huge rush of back to normal, there were some wonderful discussions at the beginning of the pandemic about creating a new normal, about coming out with learnings and coming out with new ideas of how to work and how to communicate and how to include people. And now suddenly it's all about, oh, well, that's all over now, so it's back to normal. With Full Spectrum Ireland, we got an email a few months ago from a mainstream LGBT organization saying, it's great that it's all over. We're going to have our first big in-person meeting and you're invited. And it was in a completely inaccessible space in Dublin. And, we wrote back and went, this is like, you can't invite us to something that we just physically can't get to. And there hasn't really been a good kind of response of, oh, we didn't think of that, you're right, let's do something about it. It was more a question of, oh, here's an email from this mouthy group of fringe people that we don't have to think about, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it is something where, like, if someone tells you that you are being exclusionary, believe them, you know? And it's more important to include as many people in your community as you can. That's more important than the hurt feelings of the people who run the show.
Yeah. No, 100%. And like, I know I definitely have had times where like I have been like, called out or called in on something, and I'm like, oh, I would never do that on purpose. Da, 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 da,
Yeah.
you ramble on, and then like afterwards you're like, oh, I was being really defensive. Oh, that's oof. I need to go and like kind of send a, oh, sorry about that now. Yeah, you were right. And like, even with like, I've had similar situations as well where being invited to in-person things where I can't go because of my mobility needs, or I'm like, will it be a masked event?
Yeah.
And having to always speak up and kind of go, oh, well, I have to put all my energy into going, well, can I safely go to this event? And I have to annoy you, and I have to be the annoying person in your inbox who's going, well, actually, we should have mass things, and we should do hybrid, and we should. That's so demanding on our communities. So I feel that's so hard, basically. And like, I think I can't remember if it was Isolde or Alice that said that at the beginning of the pandemic, it looked like we were going to have work towards a new normal. And as soon as governments decided to start pretending the pandemic didn't exist anymore, it was like, okay, everyone back together. Well, the HSC said we can hang out, so let's hang out, even though all of the immunologists and disabled activists online who are giving better information than most government sources are like, here's ways that you can like safeguard. So I have lots of feels about post-COVID, quote unquote. So I will rein myself in and go, who else would like to come in on ways that we can work on making like your cause like more accessible?
I'd like to jump in. I think the main thing is like to recognize where the kind of the oppression you're facing intersects with the oppression other people are facing, and how it kind of both comes from the same source. Like if you're a worker or you're a tenant, you have a lot more in common with other workers or tenants or homeless people than you do with your landlord or your boss. And recognizing that and fighting with your with your fellow workers or your fellow tenants, and unionizing is kind of the only way you can fight to bring about that change. And I think this that an important point on the privilege discourse we were talking about is that like it's important to recognize your privilege, but it's also important to recognize that dismantling your own privilege is in your interest as well. Because I think people are a lot more likely to actually pursue dismantling patriarchy if they realize that it's affecting them just as much as it's affecting, well, not just as much, but it's affecting them in the same way that it's affecting the most kind of oppressed by the patriarchy. Same with like racial hierarchies. Like all these kind of hierarchies just serve to they hurt us, even like if we're not the most marginalized person in the world. I think recognizing that and recognizing that we all need to fight together to kind of dismantle these, and that it's in our interest to do that is a really important.
Like there's like us, when we're divided, we're not as powerful. So it is important to be like, hey, let's try and work together. But yeah, no, any other kind of suggestions we can pass on to the community?
I definitely think like we should in the pro-choice debate we should try to like separate like very gendered words in it, because that's like one of the biggest problem we're facing is we are trying to almost separate the issue so that we are trying to like separate anyone who isn't a cis woman out of the conversation almost. And like it's like, no, it only affects us, you guys can't be a part of our problem, it's our problem almost. And instead, so we're actually like pushing out allies, and we're pushing out people who probably need the help just as much as us. And
Mhm.
we're just saying they don't get the help because they're not who we think needs the help.
Mhm.
I think also just on that, particularly in like kind of pro-choice debates, is that like if you center cis women in those kind of debates, you're also saying that cis women's role is to carry babies. It's to
Yeah.
like, that's like motherhood is what a woman is,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
just serves to kind of further defeat your own cause
Yeah.
by not
Yeah.
including like
Mhm.
people that aren't cis women.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that within like the sort of the pro-choice debates and to do with reproductive health care, that's one of the areas that's been kind of weaponized by, anti-trans rhetorics and anti-trans groups. And
Yeah.
it's a really cynical sort of infiltration of feminist discourse. Like there's evidence that, particular right-wing groups have very deliberately set out to try and frame anti-trans as a feminist issue, which it so obviously is not and cannot be,
Yeah.
So I think that again, as feminists, we've got to actually be mindful that our position, our rhetoric is not overtaken by someone else's interest. I mean, like one of the things that I love, the reason I call myself a cis woman is because the trans movement has allowed me to reimagine, what these gender terms mean and, to choose the one that suits me rather than just assume it about myself or about anybody else. I mean, if trans women and trans men and non-binary people and intersex people, they have so much to teach us about the assumptions that we make about ourselves. So again, it's as a cis woman, my sense of self and my feminism is only enriched by gender diversity, and that should go for all those other kind of interrelations. It should also go for like, non-disabled people, their worlds are enriched if they include disabled people in it. And, we couldn't have got the marriage equality referendum if it wasn't supported by a whole bunch of straight people, because they recognized that it was, impoverishing our society to exclude this group. So, yeah, we do need to recognize all the ways in which it is one structure that is trying to divide us and, keep us fighting among ourselves. But also when you're on the margins of the margins in an intersectional group, you often end up feeling like you're the only one who is shouting. You're the only one bringing this up. You're the only crip at the meeting. You're the only queer at the meeting, whatever it is, and you do just get exhausted having to bring it up every time over and over again. So, in terms of coalition building and in terms of allyship, other people really need to take this on and back us up, because we can't keep doing it as individuals.
Yeah, no, that's also important. Dara, you were about to come in.
I was just going to completely echo that and to say, like, echo it in so many different areas in terms of like something that I have noticed a lot since I started in this role, less than a year ago, whatever, is how much of my time I now spend talking about toilets.
Yeah.
Just like all day, every day, it's toilets.
Yep.
And as a non-binary person or whatever, like toilets as the sort of exemplar of gendered spaces and gender segregated spaces are extremely difficult to navigate all of the time, and which is something that has kind of just become part of my life and part of how I moved around the world. I kind of not stopped thinking about it, but I stopped remembering that other people were not thinking about this, I guess.
Yes.
And so when I started this job and I started having to unpack some of that in my head in terms of the way that I was talking about it with other people and trying to bring other people into this imagining of like my shoes and many people's shoes or whatever, to say like, well, imagine like every single day you go out into the world and you need to use the bathroom, and there's a whole accessibility issue around like where there are bathrooms to use in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You get to the bathrooms, and then like even just trying to explain to people like the steps that I'm going through my head in terms of using a bathroom include like physically where are the bathrooms, how separate are the men and women's bathrooms,
Mm-hmm.
are there gender neutral, universal accessible, whatever bathrooms? And if so, how comfortable do I feel using that? Am I weighing up like my safety versus like, what if like genuinely a disabled person needs to use this bathroom? Like, it's pretty shitty that I'm taking that, you know, all that kind of stuff. What am I wearing today? What kind of face mask am I wearing? Like, like literally these are things that other people just aren't thinking about. And I forget that other people aren't thinking about this. Anyway, I'm going on. And so something that I'm really aware of with allies is just trying to make that visible and trying to make visible the things that are happening for us and the barriers that we have in terms of moving around the world and accessing the world and like interacting materially with the world. And it might be bathrooms, or it might be stairs, or it might be loud noises, or it might be whatever the hell it is, masks, COVID, whatever, large groups of people. And for allies, I think, to be able to hear that and to be able to understand it, and then to realize that the thing that is creating those barriers more often than not are the cisgender people or the non-disabled people or whatever it might be that are creating that barrier, and trying to dismantle it, because, you know, as we've all said, we can't do it on our own. And I think particularly around the trans thing, like, because there's been so much anti-trans stuff in the media lately, and I've heard many times people make comparisons to, you know, the way we're talking about trans people now is the way we talked about gay men in the 70s, for example, or whatever. Which I think is an interesting comparison, and I think there's a lot of value there, but it's also very different because there are so fewer trans people than there were gay men even in the 70s. You know, and if you're looking at anywhere around maybe 1 or 2% of the population, we really do need other people with us on this. And obviously that starts with our allies and our would-be allies. And so I think there's a really important piece in terms of recognizing the realities of what people are working with or what's working against them, and trying to bring that reflectively into the things that you're doing as an ally.
Just, you might be interested, there's a group in the US called PISAR, which is People in Search of Accessible Restrooms, which is an allyship between disabled and trans and non-binary people. Exactly, for toilet lights.
I love that.
And my first piece of work that brought me into contact with trans people and that kind of shared experiences with disabled and trans people was the toilet sketch. So, you know, I'm hearing you on the toilets. It's just like, and one of the big disability rights activists, Judy Heumann, in like 1980 said, when do we get to stop being grateful for having toilets?
I know, like the solidarity between disabled and trans people, and also the disproportionate rates that trans people are disabled, minority stress and all that other fantastic stuff that we won't go into today. Like, I can only speak for myself, but I know that some days I am like, I've got my mobility aid. I could go to the disabled bathroom. I don't have to choose. This is amazing. And I think definitely for like as a safety aspect, on a personal level, I would not have any problem with trans people choosing to use an accessible bathroom, because that is also an access issue. But I do think when the wider population are like, oh, we don't need to do anything about this. There's one disabled bathroom in this building that holds 10,000 people. Like the transes can just go in there. And you're like, no, that's not the point. Like, what? So anyway, I digress. Again, like, as I keep saying, we could be having this conversation for hours, but we are getting closer to 4 o'clock. So we are going to have to do the wind down, which is very sad. But before we wind down, of course, like, we've had lots of really important conversations. But if there's anyone that's watching this that wanted to get involved with your organization, like, what ways can they get involved? How can they help? Like, this is basically, tell us what your organization is doing and advertise it here.
I can go first if no one else wants to. So with CATU, the main thing is just kind of get involved. Unions need to have as many people unionize as possible. They're more effective the more people are in the unions, and then join the union, and then also get involved in organizing in the union. No one really knows what we're doing. We're all just kind of winging it all the time. So don't be worried about being inexperienced or anything like that. Because Galway, like CATU Galway, is still getting on its feet. There's branches being set up across Connacht. So the main thing is just join the union and try and get involved and organize with your community.
No, that sounds great.
Pro-choice Galway is we're actually in a bit of a transition period at the moment. A lot of the older members have had to move on to other projects, so there's a very big influx of new people, which means that we're going to be able to take slightly more different shapes, and so if you want to join now, it would be a really great time if you want to help direct the conversation towards different needs as well. Would be greatly appreciated, and it would be wonderful to hear from a lot of different people. We're hoping to have a town hall style meeting in September or October where we can really get in touch with the public and hear their views on it. But and we're hoping as the winter progresses to do a few fundraisers, so it'd be wonderful to have people to help with those as well and come join us. You can find all the information on our Instagram. It's the best place to join and best place to find out about meetings.
No, perfect. Thanks so much, Clara. Dara, tell us how we can support Tenny.
I mean, I don't want to like come in and like, yeah, anyway, whatever. I'm just conscious we're like a big national NGO type charity and you all are doing grassroots stuff, which is, you know, wonderful. I don't want to take the spotlight from that at all. I suppose Tenny's kind of an interesting one in that we are obviously like a professional organization. We have employees, all that, including me, obviously. In terms of our work and stuff, we're obviously always, you know, welcome and encouraging of donations, fundraisers, all of that kind of stuff. It's wonderful to see how many people do think of us, you know, especially like during Pride, obviously, kind of the whole season of it is wonderful to get so much support from groups. That's always really helpful for us in terms of our funding our projects or whatever we are up to doing. A lot of our like donations and stuff that we receive would go into kind of the costs of like running our space, which obviously is in Dublin, but is like open as a community space for community groups to use for free, or would go into like you know, helping like community groups to run events or whatever it might be. And obviously we have worked as well with community organizations, like with a different hat on. I'm also with a small trans library Dublin and, you know, whatever, that kind of stuff. So anyway, I suppose all that to say that's kind of where donations go. If anybody wants to make a donation to Tenny, it's obviously much appreciated. For volunteers, we're sort of looking at developing a proper volunteer system, and we certainly are in need of volunteers, not usually on a day-to-day basis, but certainly around like events like prides and stuff. So if anybody is interested in kind of getting involved in that kind of process or you know, having your details be on file in some way, you can contact us through the Tenny website as well, which is also where you can make donations.
That's
but do
great.
your grassroots stuff.
Yeah,
you know,
I will shout out for any of our Galway people. There is Gossip Galway, which is our trans support and advocacy space. That's like peer support, grassroots. They do great work behind the scenes. So if you're not in Galway, check out what other like maybe peer support or community group, because Tenny has branches all over the country that kind of can be involved or not involved. I don't know. You know, there's trans people everywhere. Find your local trans people. But yeah, Isolde, over to you. How can we help with Disability Power Ireland?
Well, with Disability Power Ireland, like a huge amount of energy was going into July as Disability Pride Month. So it's on a little bit of a break at the moment, but, you know, we'll be coming back in the autumn and, you know, hopefully we'll kind of run occasional events over the autumn in the build up to next year, where we hope to have our first ever Disability Pride Parade next July. So obviously anyone who is interested in getting involved, it's not a specific LGBT organization, but you know, it's not exclusionary of that either. It is focused on disabled people and disability rights, as it's a disabled persons organization, a DPO. So with that, you can have a look at the website, which is, I think, disabilityprideireland.ie, and the email address should be disabilitypowerireland@gmail.com. So sometimes it's there as Disability Power Ireland, and sometimes it's Disability Pride Ireland, because the festival is Pride, the organisation is Power. So, you know, have a look at that, and we're on Twitter and Instagram, I think, as well, and Facebook. So, do a search and, join up and bring your ideas and your energy and your enthusiasm. It's an incredible group of just, I can't describe how multi-talented and multifaceted it is as a group. It's really exciting and very much ground up in terms of organisation. With Full Spectrum Ireland, we're always open to new members. So if you identify as both LGBTI plus and as disabled, you don't have to produce any proof of either of those things. You can come and join if you identify yourself. We run during the year weekly online drop-ins on a Wednesday evening. Over the summer, that's gone to monthly just because we have other things happening. We have 2 members forums. We have the Let's Talk About Sex forum, which is monthly, and then the Disability Justice League forum. So each of those is kind of, focusing on these different aspects of who we are. We're preparing training materials for sort of third-party organizations. So disability justice training for LGBT organizations, LGBTI plus training for disability organizations, plenty of other stuff. So fullspectrumireland@gmail.com. We are Full Spectrum IRL on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, and if this is something that you kind of go, oh, I didn't know there was something for these 2 parts of my personality, then by all means, get in touch and come along and we will put you to good use.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I always try and emphasize when, like, if you are interested in getting involved in anything, like volunteer wise or advocacy, like anything that's kind of in that realm, do not hesitate to get in touch with them and be like, hey, I would like to volunteer, because guaranteed you will make that group stay.
Yes.
Because usually we're like going, please,
Yes.
please can someone help us?
I think that a rule of thumb is there's always fewer people involved in organizations than you expect, and they have no idea what they're doing. So
yeah,
and a secret.
Yeah, we're all just doing our best. And I think as well, like with the kind of demands of the last couple of years, like there's a lot of like volunteer burnout, and kind of, so we need now more than ever to kind of share the load, so it's not falling on the same people all of the time to keep organizing everything. I will do a quick plug for Galway Pride. Galway Pride is happening this week. You can come and volunteer there. You can either go to galwaypride.ie. Is it galwaypride.ie or .com? I can't remember. You go to the Galway Pride social media pages, and they should have volunteer form there that you can fill out if you would like to volunteer at any of their events. And it would be, once again, very appreciated. There's remote ways you can do it, in person, whatever works for you. But yeah, I think now we're going to be wrapping up in the next minute or two. So if there's any quick questions that want to come in from anyone who is watching, and our volunteers can flag with me. So far, we have a message from our own local internet celebrity, Casey Explosion, saying big love to Galway Pride from everyone's favorite sloth mom. No, but it's been absolutely fantastic having you all for this conversation. And like I said, I could spend all week talking to you all back and forth about this. But I really hope that, in particular, that like allies to these communities that we're all kind of intersecting in are here watching. I find sometimes it can be hard to get the people who need to hear this the most in the room, but hopefully with the fact that this is streamed and people can just put it on the background and catch up another time, will hopefully help extend the reach. So I think, have we had any other? Okay, we've had no other comments come in, or no other questions come in. So we shall wrap it up here. Thank you very much for coming along, and a huge thank you to my wonderful panel of speakers, and to Galway Pride for letting me host this. It's been really great just to kind of have these kind of more nuanced conversations about how all of our advocacy intersects with one another, and just kind of giving a reminder to people that, I don't know, I feel sometimes it might be more the cis-het community that are like, oh, the LGBTs, they're welcoming of everyone. And you're kind of like, yes, but also no. so like it's just great to have conversations like this where we can kind of talk about the different barriers, and I could have or invited 20 other people to come along to talk, because there's a lot of nuance with class and race and ability and so many other areas where it intersects. So I will leave it for there. If you are looking for another Galway Pride event to attend, our intersex panel is going to be happening from 4:30. So I will leave you there. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, all right, bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you.